All right, well, welcome back to Chasing the Margin. Today we have Mr. Marcel Brunel. Marcel, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, Marcel, tell us a little bit about who you are and why you're on the podcast.
Well, there's a little bit of who I am, which I think would probably start, in California where I was born, raised in Ohio, high school Houston, joined the Army, got out of the Army, came back to here in Texas, and then went to school. Moved to Dallas, met my wife, and here I am at 58 years old. So I think the reason why I'm here is I might have a company that has, a spirit to it that might be similar to other organizations you've talked to, but it might also be a little different from other organizations. So as an entrepreneur, co-founder, can't wait to dig in and see what we can learn from each other.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that assessment. I think that your business will have a lot of unique aspects with maybe the culture and the meaning behind why you chose to be an entrepreneur, but then it'll have some uniqueness to it with exactly what you guys do. So that'll be interesting. One of the things that we had a guest on recently and we commented, and I noticed in her episode, and I noticed in your background that your school of choice is doing pretty well in football right now. So any comments on that?
Well, I stopped predicting what my school of choice can do inside of games and, outside in the business world. But I hope they do really well moving forward. And, it's always good when your school is winning because they're your school. And when they lost. Yeah. And so you can separate yourself any way you want. But it's always good to have that dog in the hunt in November, December, and as you go into January. My daughter's school is in the top 10 in football. My son's school is in the top 10. So it makes it a little bit more of an individual cheer, but also to a family, a little bit of a rivalry when both teams are playing each other.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Arkansas, so maybe one of these days I'll get to experience whatever this is that you're talking about, because that has not happened to me.
You've had a good run though. They've had a good set of series, and everybody does to do their time.
Yeah, well, let's dive into kind of your background and kind of what you do today, and maybe what you've done over the last 10 years or so. But you went to Texas A&M, and then I saw you studied psychology, which makes a lot of sense with what you do. So why psychology? Why'd you choose to do that? What interested you about it?
Well, that has a backstory of coming out of the Army. And in the Army, I did see parents maybe not treating their kids the way I thought kids should be treated. And so when I got out of the Army, I said, man, I'm going to be a child advocate. I'm going to go to law school, and I'm going to represent child abuse children in court. I'm going to give them a voice. And then there was this thing called the LSAT. And there was this thing called the GRE. And when you don't have a standardized brain, you don't do very awesomely on standardized testing. And so I did get into Texas A&M because of an idea that I had GI fund backed money from the government, and they gave me a shot. And I was very grateful. But I studied psychology because mainly I thought I could be an advocate, a voice for children who didn't have a fair shot on the planet.
Yeah. Well, I think you've probably done, whether it's children or just people in general, you've definitely helped give a voice to people with what you do now. So the first thing before we get into the current business today, and one of the big topics I want to discuss is that, but you and I got to know each other through Brunel Group, and that was kind of one of the businesses that you've run for several years in a row. So explain to us what exactly that business is and what it did all these years.
So I started that business in 2012, and it was after working at a corporation for many, 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 many years. And my wife came up to me and said on December the 3rd, or December the 4th of 2012, why don't you start your own company? And on December the 5th, I started Brunel Group, and I never looked back. What I thought at the time was I wanted to be a keynote speaker. No, it's not something I gravitate towards. I thought, man, I want to be a mediator. And so I mediated family divorces, and I lasted 2 years because it just was so hard on my heart to see people Maybe, one thing I learned in mediation is you can't mediate vengeance. And so you see one human taking 5 pounds of their own flesh to make sure that the human that they were married to loses 1 pound of flesh. And I couldn't psychologically manage that while I saw children kind of going back to giving them a voice. They really didn't have a voice, and now they became, an option when it came to what we were going to mediate. So I lasted 2 years in mediation. Then I thought, oh my gosh, I want to be in leadership. And that's really where I had a tendency to gravitate. That's where I had a preference, and I found that it came natural. So Brunel Group really was a set of different organizations that I brought together and I took to the market as one under Brunel Group. So I had some leadership type skills, techniques, and approaches. I had an assessment that could measure a little bit of a leadership style. I put them together and I took them to market, and it lasted about 12 years. And it was great. And that served me both on the giving me a purpose. It gave me a chance to go out and master some new things. And it also gave me a lot of autonomy. So I was the one who, at the end of the month, end of the quarter, end of the year, got to either say, what the heck happened? Or, let's see if we can maybe replicate and duplicate that next year. So it did have a set of highs and lows, but mostly it was an awesome experience.
Yeah. So it sounds like, with possibly pursuing some type of law at one point, and then with getting into mediation, and then with ultimately getting into, leadership training and development, things like that, each one of the things that have interested you over your life seem to have this aspect of, you want to be successful to a certain extent, but also people are really important to you. And the way that people are either treated, or the way that they think, or the way that they act towards others is just as important maybe as the business side of things. Why do you think that is? Why is Marcel like that?
Ooh, why is Marcel like that? Well, let's take a step back a little bit, and let's talk about my order of where I am in the family. So I do have an older brother.
Okay.
I do have an older sister. I do have a younger brother, and I do have a younger sister. So when you're one of 5 and you are smack dab literally in the middle, there is a sense of you're the negotiator, you're the moderator, you're the collaborator. And you can get kind of pounded on by the older, but you also know you get in trouble for pounding on the younger. And so there is a sense of, checks and balances. And I think once I started to get into that role, I tended to go more towards those who didn't have a voice. So at one point, from 2011, I think until 2016, I was on the board for the Dallas Lighthouse for the Blind. And one thing I learned there was that there's wonderful people who wake up every morning and a bus system brings them to work, and they sew all the road guard vests for the Department of Defense. They put together all of the markers used by the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard. And they don't like to be called blind people. They like to have that they are people who are visually impaired. Let's celebrate the people, not so much the blind. And that, I got to tell you, Troy, I'm not saying it changed my life, but what I am saying is, that changed my perspective, because they are human. And sometimes we put their whatever it is, whatever you want to call it, their lack of being able to see first. Mm-hmm. When in reality, it's just, I'm a human, and guess what? I'm visually impaired, and I still have a heart. I still have feelings. I still have the idea that I want autonomy, and I too want purpose. So yeah, I think that might be where it all started from, the pecking order of where I grew up as a kid. How about that?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it is really funny, even you use the word moderate in that sense too, where you're right in the middle. You've got 2 people on both sides of the spectrum of you, and then you've got to somehow get everybody to, I guess, be okay with everybody else.
One of the jokes that I talk about when I'm brought into an organization is the 3 biggest problems of people working together are people working together. Mm. And so when you have a family, when you have an organization, when you have an agency, it's really about people working together. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're a business podcast, so not to get too philosophical, but I think, even we joke about it. It's like the business is not really that hard, and it wouldn't be hard at all if it weren't for all these people. And I think that that's the thing about life is you see these amazing things, which is kind of what you experienced with working with some of the visually impaired that you worked with those years ago. And then you see kind of the frustrating side of things with people just nagging at each other. And it's like these two people loved each other. They're still people. They're still human beings. They would probably still agree on 95% of the questions that you ask them. But that 5% they can't agree on, and that's the ugly side of humanity. But then the beautiful side of humanity is, like you said, watching people overcome any type of obstacle, regardless of what it is, and showing the human side of who they are.
Absolutely right. I'm really loving the idea you're connecting all these dots for me. This is awesome for me. Thank you.
It's a therapy session for you, Marcel.
Count me in. Count me in.
So I think all of that kind of ties into what you're now doing today. So explain to us what you do today and then maybe tie us together.
You bet. So in 2017, on Christmas Eve, my son, who was home at the time, I think he was 18, I had been lying about my drinking to my entire family for about 7 months. And so I told my family, like in May of 2017, I'm never going to drink again. I'm not going to do this anymore. And by about June, I had, 2 handles of Tito's vodka, one in my car and one in my office. And so on December 24th, 2017, it was a Sunday, the Cowboys played at noon. And I said, with all of my best thinking, let's fill up the Yeti, half with vodka, half with a Diet Coke, and watch the game. Then I forgot that we had about, the whole family was coming over for Christmas Eve. And when my son took the lid off of my Yeti, Dad is drinking again. And the journey began. So that, I think, was the first step in me maybe saying, hey, I got to figure some things out. And the first thing I had to figure out was, what was it at 50 years old that allowed me to lie to somebody that I had been married to for 20-some years now? And that was my first journey. And what I figured out was, Troy, is it was emotion-based. It wasn't logic. It wasn't intellect. I never saw my dad do it. I never read a book at Texas A&M. I never practiced lying to my spouse. It was not intellectual. It was all 100% emotion-based. And so when you have the emotion of shame, that emotion is when I go against the values of a community, the values of my family. Well, if you lie and there's a value system in the family that says, hey, we don't really like it when people lie. I did that. Then there's guilt. When you come from the military, lean and mean, just hard charging, you feel this guilt of, how come I'm this weak? How come I can't overcome drinking? And then I think the third one was embarrassment. The embarrassment of not being able to raise my hand. But I didn't have that information on December 25th when I got sober. So this Christmas, 2025, I'll be sober for 8 years on Christmas Day. Somewhere around 4 years ago, I took a course by Dan Newby. And Dan Newby is the co-author of the 2 books that he and I have put together, Dignity in Policing, Dignity in Leadership. And he's also the co-founder of Dignity, Inc. And it's a global organization, and I'll get more into that. So I took a course online. Dan is out of Spain, and I log on, and every single 2 weeks, Dan would teach us the difference in clusters of emotions. So 1 week it was, we're going to break down the emotions of sympathy, empathy, pity, and compassion. I didn't know the difference between any of them. I thought compassion was sympathy, and sympathy was pity, and pity was empathy, and it's not. The next time we got together, we broke down the emotions of anger, frustration, and disappointment. I had no clue there was any difference at all. The next time we got together, we broke down the emotions of inspiration, optimism, and enthusiasm. So what I learned from Dan was there's over 200 emotions in the human body, and I, on my best day, probably knew 15, 20. So then I started taking another class with Dan and another class with Dan. And then I just became a regular. And one day, it was actually 4 years ago last month, he emailed me and he said, if you ever want to partner on something, if you ever want to collaborate, let me know. I remember I typed him back one email and it said, I want to write a book on policing. I want it to include everything about how emotions play a big role in policing. I want it to be 200 pages long, and I want it to be global. And so we went on a journey. And so then we started writing a book together. Now, why is this important? Because the reason why I picked policing was when I had Brunel Group, I was just beginning my work with police around the idea of emotions, around the idea that it's got to be beyond intellect. So that journey had kind of begun, and yet when I met Dan, it got power charged, and we went on a straight mission. So we wrote a book called Dignity in Policing. And the reason why it's called Dignity in Policing was we didn't come up with a title. We had all different kinds of titles. And somebody wrote, so we had about 57 different other police and professional staff proof the book. Mm-hmm. Because, when you're not from the policing industry, you want it to be current, complete, and correct in your writing. And you can only pet a porcupine one way. And when you're reading a book about your profession and there's one word that's not correct, that's not complete, that's not current, there is a sense of, doggone it. So we really did labor over every word. When that book was done, we sent it out to the marketplace and we got phone calls. And the phone calls were, hey, love the content, but I'm not in policing. How about something in leadership? And we're like, okay. So we went back out and we started talking to about 40 leaders and we wrote a book called Dignity in Leadership. And that's out as of May of this year. That is now in 7 different countries. And we have Dignity in Policing in the month of February being rolled out in South Africa at Northwest University under the criminal justice side of the house inside that university. So it is kind of taken off, but the journey began way back in 2017. And what I was able to really learn was the reason why I lied as a husband to my spouse was shame, guilt, and embarrassment. And I think if I struggled with that, maybe other people would. So if I could take what I learned, teach through my wounds to another human, it might be helpful. So when I go inside police departments, the chiefs are like, so what are we talking about here? Where do emotions fit in policing? And when you think about it, suicide, taking your life by suicide, there's emotions of helpless, hopeless, worthless, maybe even a little loneliness. Maybe you sprinkle in shame and guilt, emotion-based. When you think of family violence, hitting somebody that you have in the home, striking someone, it's not intellect. Maybe it's rage. Maybe it's fury. Maybe it's anger. My eyes can see my nose every second of the day that I'm awake, and yet it chooses not to acknowledge it. I feel I have 200 emotions in my human body, and I was raised maybe not to acknowledge it. Where did that come from? Well, in high school, when you played soccer in Houston, 1981 to 1985, I was taught water's for losers, water's for the weak. When I went in the military, when I went through the Ranger course, I was told, hey, if you don't brush your teeth for 2 months, it makes you tough. No, it doesn't. It actually gives you gingivitis. So I think maybe sometimes we get tough wrong. Yeah. And so that begot the journey of Dignity Inc., Dignity in Policing, Dignity in Leadership. And so here we are on year 4. and we're still going.
Yeah. I think that, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because I feel like based off everything that you've said, that you would have a very similar insight to me and a lot of the people that I talk with and hang out with. I think there's this, the whole stigma around being a man in general, about you need to be tough, you need to not show emotion. And, maybe younger generations and even somewhat of my generations, I think that changed, at some point probably within my generation, where that mindset and that thought process was changing. But I think a lot of older generations grew up with what you're saying, with like, you need to be tough, you need to not show emotions. Therefore, they were never really taught what emotions are. And then you run into a lot of these things that you've experienced personally over all these years. Is that kind of, would you agree with all that?
I can't shake my head up and down enough. Let's take what you said, Troy, and let's break it down. So one of the things that I work on inside of a police department are myths about emotions. And the first thing we all have to agree is that myths are not genetic. When you learn a myth, you weren't born with it, right? So I wasn't born with the myth of saying, oh my gosh, there are positive and negative emotions. No, someone taught me that. There are no positive and negative emotions. When we tell somebody, well, there's negative emotions, that's just because we don't like the way they make us feel. Like guilt and shame, those are wonderful emotions. They get a bad rap. People confuse pride with arrogance. We shouldn't have pride. We should have pride. Pride is wonderful. It says, my children did something wonderful and they want to share it. You can have good Texas pride when you walk into a Buc-ee's. You should. But it gets confused with arrogance. And arrogance sometimes gets confused with hubris. So there is a set of emotions that sometimes people say, well, he was just jealous that the other person was able to do this. That's not jealousy, that's envy. So a lot of times I'm in the world trying to clarify the misperceptions. Misperceptions are not hereditary. These myths are not hereditary. And so when we say men who show emotions are weak, well, what we're learning is the truth is that they're an actual strength. When we say there is, what's another big one in policing? Emotions will get you killed. It's a big one. It's not a common all the time, but it's a big one. And what we've learned is no. When you're emotionally regulated, they can serve you and keep you alive. But sometimes we take an emotion and we couch it with all the other ones and we put it in this big generic pot and we say they're bad or they're not good. And I think the last thing that we have to think about is I do work with sometimes police officers who do feel that officers are becoming soft, and you have to sit them down and just kind of ask them what that means to them. And when you realize they're building up walls around themselves as they're falling apart inside. So it does become a defense mechanism that says, I don't want other people to change because that means I've got to do it myself.
Yeah, I really like how you labeled that back to what you said, emotions are not necessarily negative or positive. Like they're not negative. There's not negative emotions. And my wife and I have this conversation sometimes too, where it's like, you don't need to feel bad about feeling a certain way because that's what makes you you. And it's like, you're explaining it in a way where those emotions can have positive outcomes because you are meant to have those emotions for certain things, such as pride helps you to be proud, to probably say, I love you to your kids. And the example that you gave with being proud of your kids, or being pride makes you want to do something well. There's things like that. That's not being boastful or being arrogant, I guess is the word you used. And then also feeling, shame. Shame is not necessarily a bad thing because it makes you think through some things based off what you're feeling within that moment. And I think that all of these things, nobody takes into account that they all are part of what makes up that person them. And that's what's going back to what we said earlier, that's what makes people so interesting, is because they have all of these emotions and they're so interesting as a human being just because of how they express their emotions, why they feel the emotions, because of the uniqueness of them. I like all that.
If I could take one message to the world, it would be, boy, oh boy, sure would be great if we did just 2 words, normalized emotions. What if we normalized emotions?
Yeah.
What if we never heard another human say, I'm sorry I'm getting emotional? What that tells me is we haven't done it yet. We've normalized space travel. We've normalized restaurants. We've normalized pillows. We've normalized kissing our spouses goodbye. We've normalized podcasts. We've normalized Zoom, Teams. All these things are normal. Cell phones, they're all normal. But we haven't normalized emotions. We haven't normalized emotional wellness. There's still a lot of work to do. And going back to what you said, totally agree. If someone said to me, what about emotions? Emotions are here to serve us, or they're not.
Well, then let me ask you this, Marcel, because you mentioned planes, cell phones, all these things that are still relatively new developments. Emotions have been around since humans have been around. And I think that for the most part, they haven't really changed. Like, they're just the emotions that humans have always had. Maybe they're expressed differently, I don't know, but they've always been there. Why is it so hard to adapt to something like a plane or a cell phone or any of these physical things when I think if you were to sit down and have a conversation with somebody that was a rational conversation, I think we could all agree that normalizing emotions would be a positive outcome for every single human being. So then why is it so hard, and why have we never done it?
Well, let's go back 40 years ago when I was taught that water's for the weak. The reason I was taught that probably was that was the best thinking of the time. When you go back to someone passing away in a D1 football team years later because he didn't get water while playing football, somebody probably sat down and said, after further review, we've got different pieces of data. Right now, we're able to measure a lot of the things going on inside that no one can see. For example, I went and had a coronary artery check CT scan on my heart. Okay, well, I had no idea what was going on inside, so I really couldn't change anything, eating, exercise on the outside. So one of the things that we're saying is, I think right now there is a lot more being learned around emotional regulation. So let's go back another thing. 30 years ago, no one really ever heard the term emotional intelligence. No. It wasn't until 1905. That was the first time we tested somebody's IQ, 1905. It wasn't until 80 years later, Barone, he coined the term in 1985, EQ. There's an 80-year gap between our IQ and our EQ. Now in 2025, we're talking less about emotional intelligence. That was 30 years ago. I got married 30 years ago. And I'm not saying emotional intelligence isn't important. What I am saying is we've evolved. We've evolved with emotional agility, emotional resilience. And what you and I have been talking about, and one of my passions is emotional literacy. You can't navigate something you can't name. It's like kid comes home, they're angry, they're crying, they're hungry. And you say, what do you want to eat? And they say, I don't know. I can't help you. It would be like you and me going into a restaurant and the menu simply says food, just says food. It doesn't break out where the salads are. It doesn't break out where the main courses are. It doesn't break out the appetizers. When we are in a environment today, what we're learning is it's not just the intellect. There's an intellectual competency side, but there's also an emotional side. And you can have, Simon Sinek says, find your why. I believe that till the cows come home. Find your why. But you also have to find your backbone to go put it into action. And that's the emotions. That's the emotions side. My inside, my inner game creates my outer game. I just watched Thanksgiving, the whole day through the lens of emotions. I saw humans in the same room, one team, one side cheering for the Cowboys, the other side cheering for the Kansas City Chiefs. And there were some humans cheering for the Cowboys who didn't like that somebody else was cheering for the Kansas City Chiefs. They couldn't tolerate it. There's nothing wrong with that. But what we have to remember is just because you're 65 doesn't mean you're emotionally mature. Just because you're 16 doesn't mean you can drive. When we say emotional maturity in 2025, what we're saying is 4 words: handling hard stuff better. And you can be young part of your life, but we can all be immature all of our life.
Yeah. So then specifically with what you do now, going into these police departments and visiting places all over the place, do you see that as a pretty common theme where somebody just assumes that they are more emotionally mature than other officers within the department just purely because they're older? And do you find that when talking to the two of them, one of them truly understands the emotional maturity, and that could be the younger one, and the older one really doesn't even understand what that concept is?
Of course. I mean, I think you would find that, in any neck of the woods.
Right.
What I do know, though, is sometimes when you work with with humans who are my age, 58, we might look at the younger and say, they sure are entitled, But then when you go work with the younger, they look up at humans like me and they go, that veteran group over there, they sure are entitled. We all have our challenges, whether I'm a veteran or whether I'm a new boot coming in. But that's where the word dignity comes in. So what we learned was dignity is the uber emotion. Dignity says that I, Troy, no matter where I am in the world, feel worthy. No matter where I am in the world, I, Troy, I decide. I decide what works for me, and I decide what doesn't work for me. And for you, you're probably like, that makes sense. But when you're a people pleaser like me, that doesn't make any sense at all. Because when you stand in dignity, you're able to protect your boundaries. But when you're a people pleaser, you kind of let people cross those boundaries. And then you say, okay, that boundary got crossed. Are you going to say anything? No. So then that turns into anger. Then it turns into a resentment. Then let me percolate for about 30 years. It might even turn into vengeance. So these are all things that we're discovering inside of police departments, fire departments, sheriff's offices, any type of a first responder organization, specifically in fire. EMS, they all have the capacity to have emotions run strong, opinions vary, and the stakes get high. Intellectually, we're good. It's on the emotional side. That's where I think we can go and grow and do some great work.
Yeah, well, diving specifically into, because you and I have had lots of conversations over the years, just, how's business going, how's life going, etc. So, I know that you've spent a lot of time within Dignity and Policing, and that at some point rolling out Dignity Inc. and becoming a tool for not just police officers, but even now with leadership and other things possibly on the horizon. I understand that dignity in general is very important in teaching everyone, but why did you start with policing? Was there a reason all those years ago that of all things, because everybody has emotions, why did you pick that?
So I was up in Allen, Texas, and the police chief at the time, his name was Brian Harvey, Chief Brian Harvey. This is in 2014, maybe, yeah. And I was working with the city of Allen city staff, so the city manager and all the directors, to include the council. And they were doing great. They were doing great work. They just wanted to pull closer together. I came in and I worked with them for a day. And at the time, I was leveraging a psychometric assessment that measured what you're like at home what you're like at work, and what you're like when you're stressed. And it gave you those 3 different dimensions. It was awesome. As I was leaving, Chief Harvey knocked on my window, and I said, "Yes, sir." And so I was in my car. I rolled down my window. 2014. He said, "Have you ever worked with police?" I'm like, "No, sir." He said, "Have you ever read a book called Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement?" I said, "No, sir." He says, "I want you to read it. I think you could do great work with police." I said, "Yes, sir." Went home, went online, bought the book Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement by Kevin Gilmartin, and I got to chapter 6, and it changed my life. The chapter 6 title is The Hypervigilant Biological Roller Coaster. And what it talks about is when you are in a policing role, you're hypervigilant, your head sits on a swivel, and you have what they call situational self-awareness. Okay, just everything coming into the scene, everything leaving the scene, everything that was already in the scene. And what I said was, well, what about what's going on inside? How about internal situational awareness? And so that journey began starting with police. So then I went to a city called Coppell, Texas, city right next to mine, and I knew the chief there. We went to the same church, and I said, Can I follow like 5 officers for a year? No, just want to learn. I want to learn the lingo. I want to learn the language. I want to learn what it's like. And so I did it. I followed 5 officers for a complete year, and I learned the language. I learned the idea. I learned the approaches, and I learned the big thing, and that is, boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, do we really have a lot of emotions going on. And we say a phrase sometimes, you better control your emotions. Okay, all right. When we say that phrase, you need to control your emotions. I'm not saying it's wrong. What I am saying is there's going to be a day of reckoning. What we're saying in 2025 is maybe we better navigate our emotions. Controlling them, that's pushed down, and maybe reserve the right to be smarter in 30 years. They will, boxed up emotions never stay boxed up. They will come out. They will bleed into your life, into your family, into your career. Now remember, we retire from work. We don't retire from life, and we don't retire from family. But sometimes we see life and family through our work eyes because it becomes so consuming. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. We just have to be okay with the consequences. And I think in 2025, we're starting to see that DWIs have a lot to do with emotions. Burning down and burning out, everything to do with emotions. Family violence, emotions. Taking your life by suicide, emotions. All lying to a superior. That's emotion-based. Hey, you want to be prejudiced? We just lost an officer in San Antonio. He was in the news, so I'm not sharing anything private, but the officer said black female officers are only hired because of diversity. That's not logic. That is emotion-based. That is prejudice. And what we're learning is that we have the choice to leave the profession of policing on our own, or our behaviors are going to ask us to leave.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much there that's really good. I agree with all of that. Is there, with dignity in policing and developing all this curriculum over all these years, diving specifically into the business side of it, it sounds like you did a lot of reading. You took the time to follow officers to kind of understand how they work, what they do, why they do the things that they do. For anybody who's considering some type of path for their life and they want to see what it's like, and that's kind of what you did to an extent with this whole journey, would you recommend that for, hey, just follow somebody who's trying to do what you're looking to do, just so you can understand what it's like before you just jump in head first? I guess part of that is kind of jumping in head first because you just follow them. But
if you're gonna study things that float, I'm not going to study things that sink. So if I want to build a boat, I'm going to go study things that float. So I would say to anybody who wants to start their own entrepreneurial journey, I would go to your phone and I would invite 10 friends. And the first thing I would do is set up a cup of coffee with each one of those 10 friends. And I would buy them that cup of coffee. What I would do during that conversation is start with, I have this idea. Here's kind of my idea. A lot of people that I bump into, they want to create their website first. They want to go get a business card. They want to start with all their marketing materials, and they've yet to have a conversation. They've yet to see, where would I go? Who would I see? What might I say? So the first thing I would say is, yes, I would go follow. I would also have many conversations to tweak, shine, and polish my idea into something that's practical and doable. What am I good at? What do I love? And what might allow me to pay my rent and maybe hit a car payment every now and then? Yeah. So, and I would say this regardless if Troy wasn't a CPA. I tell this to each and every person that I bump into that wants to start their own organization. Step one, before you even start thinking about having a business, find yourself not just a good CPA, not just a great CPA, an amazing CPA. They will help you navigate so many things that you didn't even think about that were needed and necessary on the journey to be what we would call profitable, right? You can't run a company without margin. So when you says chasing the margin, I'm like, you can't run a company without margin. You got to have margin. And yet, what we have done at Dignity Inc. is everything for fun and for free. We work with people to get them to do what we do in the world for fun and for free. There is an assessment. Yes, it has an investment. There are books. There are tools. Those have investments, of course. Why? So we can go and create more. So we can go and share with more. We're writing a book right now called Dignity in Education. Whew, my goodness gracious. Emotions in admin. Emotions in the professors. Emotions in the students. Emotions in the families. Those are all kind of coming together. So we need to go and how about dignity in parenting? How about dignity in culture? These are all things that we're thinking about because, as you said, emotions, we're never not touched. We're never not in an emotion.
Well, then how would you respond, Marcel, to maybe it's a young person who, like you said, they've got a car payment. They have to make said car payment, and you took a year to follow these people, and nobody paid you to follow those people for that year. So I think a lot of times people run into this whole, I could do that, but it's going to take me 10 hours a week to invest my time into something that's literally not going to pay me at all. And I think they can't see past the immediate. What would you tell that person of why is that important? How do you encourage them to look past for the future, to just invest in something that maybe is not putting dollars in their pocket, but is giving them all this education and training, like on-the-job training is essentially kind of what you had for that year? Like, what would you tell them?
That sometimes in order for you to get something you've never had, you're going to have to do some things you've never done. That's step one. You want this? Okay. There's two questions. What are you willing to give up, and what are you willing to do? Pick your hard. It's hard. It's hard to start your own company. It's hard to work in an organization where it's toxic. It's hard not being asked your opinion. It's hard when you're the only one who makes the decision. It's hard being out of shape. It's hard to be in shape. It's hard to get divorced. It's hard to stay married. It's hard to start your own company while you're already at an existing company. Okay, pick your hard. You win. Yep. Yeah. I can't tell you. So I would encourage them to secure two emotions. The first emotion is doubt. Anybody who wants to start their own company is going to have an emotion called doubt. Doubt's a wonderful emotion. It says, I've never done this before. That's the story you tell yourself. But what does doubt have you do? Be prepared. Be prepared. And the second emotion I'd say is boldness. Boldness is different from bravery. Boldness and bravery are different from courage. Boldness says, I know what I got to do. And guess what? I'm going to go do it. So when you rock climb, there's two emotions that allow you to rock climb. One is doubt. I wonder if this rock is going to hold 210 pounds. Okay, 215. If it's going to hold 215 pounds, right? But then you've got to have the boldness to go and do what? Reach for another crevice. And then you're going to have doubt. And then you're going to have boldness. So anybody can come up to me and say, yeah, this is going to be hard. Yeah, I don't have the time. Okay, then you win. You win. I wake up at 2:30 every morning. I'm at work by 3:30. My first Zoom call with Dan Newby in Spain is at 3:30. We talk about marketing on Mondays. We talk about the portal on Tuesdays. We talk about the assessment on Wednesdays. I'm in India. Our psychometrician is out of Scotland. I am loving every minute of it. But it's all hard. So pick your hard. And I think the last thing that we have to think about when people want to do something while they're already doing it on the side, it's about the task, not the time. What's it going to take for you to be successful? 5 words. It takes what it takes. I don't know. I don't know what it's going to take for you to be successful and run your own company. I do know there's another 5 words, willing to do the work. That's it. I want to stay sober. What are the 5 words I got to live by? Willing to do the work. I want to stay married for another 30 years. What's it going to take? Nobody knows except for me. It takes what it takes. Sometimes people just need to remember that there is an emotion called doubt, but holy smokes, what about my friend called boldness? Let's harness that, and we only have to do 1% every day. We don't have to go out and start the company, but Jiminy Christmas, go have a conversation.
Well, Marcel, you make it sound so easy. Has your mindset always been like this? Like, have you always been able to tell yourself in the moments of doubt, it takes what it takes, or you need to be bold here? Did you even have those questions during that year period, or maybe before or after then when you're developing all this curriculum?
Not even close. Not even close. I think what it was more of something that was my preference. It was a tendency. It was something I felt called to do. And so there's a career, but there's also kingdom work. This felt like This felt like work that, you go where God is crying. And I felt like police, they were getting divorced. They were getting arrested for DWIs. They are, family violence, suicide. And what you learn is underneath that badge, underneath that professional staff's shirt, clothes, important people. Doing important work. And they don't wake up in the morning and say, man, geez, this is going to be they know it's going to be tough. They just don't want to be any more than it has to be. These are unbelievable humans. And every day they take a sponge and they go inside their community. They go inside their school. They go inside their university and they soak up the dirty water so we don't have to see it. But then they go back to the station and it's like, where do I squeeze this out? I don't know. Do I squeeze it out here? I don't know. I'll take it home. Okay, I'm not going to squeeze it out there. And then the next day they go and do it for 12 more hours. And they have these dirty sponges so I, in my community, can feel safe. I, in my community, can be respected. And they do this relentlessly. They do it religiously. They signed up to serve. And after 30 years, they confuse serve with sacrifice because so few are now taking the call. And it's getting better. It's getting better. But serve and sacrifice, they're completely different. They're completely different. And I can't be more grateful than to have them be my teachers, right? The student in me acknowledges the teachers in fire, in police, in constables, in parole, in probation, in sheriff, fire, EMS. All of these humans wake up every day and they never once in 4th grade says, boy, sure would love to feel irrelevant. Sure would love to be disrespected. Not one of them. I didn't raise my hand in 4th grade and say, at 50, addiction would be amazing. These are all things that we went on our best way, doing our best work, thinking our best thoughts. But that's where the emotional resilience comes in. I didn't know it takes what it takes 8 years ago. I didn't know willing to do the work 8 years ago. These are all things that others have taught me. Why? Because they taught me through their wounds. They took their trauma and they turned it into their biggest asset so it can be part of my journey. And I think that's what we're being called to do. When we all experience trauma, I've got 2 choices, get bitter or get better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all of these things, you talked about the police officers, and I agree with you so much that these people are putting these stressful environments every single day, and they're having to deal with some of the things that nobody wants to deal with, but that's what is required to get the job done for them. And then they just hold it, and they don't know how to navigate it, like you said. So they just hold it, and eventually it's going to come out in some form, because it can't just be held there forever. And I think it would be really nice to hear, because I think not only police officers do that, but each one of us, especially people listening, probably have either they currently struggle with it, or maybe people they know struggle with holding these emotions and not finding a way to navigate them correctly. Is there something within the dignity and policing that's like a tangible tool, or maybe it's the leadership or whatever it is, that you could just say, this is a good way to help navigate all of these emotions that you're just holding on to?
Absolutely. Yeah, we created these emotional regulation cards. It's a deck of cards, and on each card is an emotion. So emotion 1, acceptance. Boy, oh boy, that'll help you get through the holidays when you can accept some things. There's another emotion, tolerance. Oh my gosh, tolerance. There's an emotion, dignity. There's an emotion. So there's over 200. We pick 71 that we think most humans bump into most often. It's a very tangible way for you to do one thing: grow my emotional literacy. So just how I learned how to read, I started with small words, and then I started having sentences, and then I went to reading comprehension. Same thing happens with literacy. I can't navigate something I can't name. So when I come home at night, I'm able to say, my wife says, how you doing? I said, a little disappointment, tons of excitement. A tad bit of arrogance today got in my way. We actually are able to brag backwards. It teaches me to brag. I come into my house like, let me tell you all the ways I got in my own way today. I don't brag forwards. You're able to just, here's my number one goal. How can I describe what's going on inside me to where you could understand it? That's it. That's it. And for someone, it might be a little bit more on the emotional literacy side. For someone, it might be more on the emotional agility side, maybe a little bit more flexible. I don't trust anyone. Okay, all right. How about just trusting a couple people? Some people, they're not emotionally resilient. They have a hard time bouncing back. They got screwed over two police chiefs ago, and they're still holding on. It's like, well, what is your job, you think? I'm going to make everybody miserable. You've ever had a bad 5-minute day, and you said, you know what? Today, it's going to be a bad 8-hour day. People are going to pay for this. We are always in choice. Always in choice. I can decide at any moment. On June 19th of this year, my mom passed away, and I was in Houston. And my dad calls me, hey, you sitting down, you okay? I said, yeah, what's going on? He goes, your mom passed away today. In that moment, in that second, in Houston, lonely hotel room, getting ready to work with the Harris County Fire EMS 6 and 12 the next day. I was in choice. I was absolutely in choice. When you go to somebody else's house for Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthday parties, Father's Day, Mother's Day, whatever it is, Valentine's Day, some people go out of obligation. That's an emotion. I have no other choice. This is my wife's family, and I go every year. And well, you can let that emotion go. You can actually set that emotion down, and you can pick up an emotion of tolerance and acceptance. So there is a way for us to be able to learn how to set some things down, work through what's going on inside, so it doesn't have a chance to bleed through and start to affect what's going on the outside.
Yeah, it's amazing. I was listening to a podcast interviewing somebody. It was actually this morning of all days, and he said essentially the same thing that you said, where he was like, somebody will let an hour, three separate hours on 3 separate days of a year, just over or consume them. And all of a sudden, because of 3 hours that were really bad, you had an entire bad year. Like they would consider it a bad year because of what happened in a 3-hour period. And I think that that's so easy for us as humans to just carry it and not just try to navigate, why am I feeling the way that I'm feeling, maybe think retrospectively and just take a minute and breathe And all of a sudden, if you were to just do that, then maybe you could move through that, and instead of having a bad year, you could have a bad half a day. And it would just change life for you in general. So to my question, because I think I understand this and I want to make sure you agree, for those who are listening, maybe a very tangible thing, like you guys have the cards, which is a good tool, but even if they don't have access to that right now, a tangible tool that you mentioned is find one or a few people that you can trust in your life and just try to express yourself verbally instead of just holding that in. Like you said, you get home to your wife and you say, these are the emotions that I experienced today. And I think that anybody listening can hopefully easily find at least one person in their life that they see on a regular basis where they can just practice that and say, these are my emotions that I experienced today, and you can just release them, and you don't have to just hold them all the time.
I love it. Let's go two ways. Another thing an individual can do is ask themselves one question: is this emotion serving me? So the emotion of obligation, sometimes when you're the middle child, doesn't always serve you. The emotion of loyalty that says, I've got everyone's back. We have history in my family. I'm always there for them. Yeah. So I think the first question I like to ask myself sometimes is this emotion serving me? The second thing I think maybe we stop asking ourselves is, why am I feeling this way? Maybe we start asking ourselves, what is this emotion trying to teach me? Guilt's trying to teach you something. Shame's trying to teach you something. Embarrassment is trying to teach you something. It's not asking you to get rid of it as fast as you can. Emotions are temporary visitors. They're not permanent tenants. They're messengers. It's just like thunder. Thunder comes and it says, Troy, Marcel, take cover. And if we don't take cover, there's no consequences for thunder, just for Troy and Marcel. Just like when we have emotions, you don't have to pay attention to them. There's no consequence. There was no consequence on December 24th of 2017 for shame, guilt, and embarrassment. There was just tons of consequences for who? The guy sitting in front of you. So when we start to think about simple things I can do, remember these three words as long as you live. Notice what I'm feeling. Notice it. Notice it. Can I name it? And can I navigate it? Dan and I, Dan Newby, co-founder, Dignity Inc., we're thinking about, we are going to do it. We're going to create an app. And it's going to allow AI to help Troy and Marcel. Okay, here's what I'm feeling. Here's what I'm feeling. At least give me some guidance on what that emotion might be. Why? Because I can't process it if I can't name it. You can have all the PTSD. You can have all the bad childhood brought up. You can have all the trauma. And there's a principle of emotional regulation that says emotions don't justify your behavior. They better explain it. Just because you had a crappy childhood doesn't give you any right at all to be an arrogant human. It doesn't justify your behaviors. It just better explains it. Yeah. So going back to kind of wrapping that up, ask yourself, is this emotion serving me? And not, why am I feeling this way? What is this emotion trying to teach me?
That's good. I definitely, before I wrap up here, I just want you to be able to mention to all the guests, whether it's maybe a police officer that their department could use your services, or maybe it's a leadership team that might be interested in learning from you, or just where to find some of your books, materials, etc.
Absolutely.
Give me where to find you, how to contact you.
If you want to go to the internet, you go to dignity-inc.com, and you would learn all about dignity in leadership, all about dignity in policing, all about the emotional regulation decks. We just are coming out with an assessment, an emotional regulation dashboard assessment. It's out. The portal to take it to the world, where 500 humans could be taking the assessment at the same time, will be done on December 20th, and it goes live January 2nd. What that assessment does is it measures your personality, and it also measures it with your emotional regulation. So we're going to give you an emotional regulation score. We're going to give you an emotional intelligence. We're going to measure your emotional agility. We're going to measure your emotional resilience. And we're going to measure your emotional literacy. Then we're going to tie that to how it might affect your personality. And then last but not least, we're going to measure your distress, when stress becomes not productive. And we're going to link it to your well-being. So there's a lot of inside information that allows you to maybe work on the inside to maybe help what's going on the outside. So that's that. And then you can email me at marcel@dignity-inc.com. You can call me on my phone. I'm at 99% reliable. I'll call you back. But 972-841-5890. And it's all under the cone of silence. So sometimes officers call me and they're going through a divorce. Sometimes they call me. Sometimes they call me and they say, hey, I'm not getting along with my son. You know, I had a woman working for a major city in Oklahoma, and she was in charge of her daughter's wedding. And when she read the emotion of arrogance, I never saw her again. She got up and left. And she drove from Oklahoma City to Tulsa to apologize to her daughter. These are big things. In the room, yeah, we're working on things that are very important in policing. But the real work happens when someone calls and says, yeah, I just got a DWI. Yeah, I didn't get promoted. I died on the vine. That's where the real work begins. Yeah. And it's very special that they call.
Yeah. And then for anybody, because you've got all these things that are in the future with the app, I think that's really exciting for the future, and then other things that you're going to be releasing along the way. Is there anywhere they can follow you where you send out updates, or how do they get updates on when some of this stuff is releasing?
Yeah, you would be very surprised that I'd have no idea. But we have this wonderful marketing team, and I know it's info@dignityinc.com if you emailed us there. I know we're on Twitter. I know we're on Instagram. I know we're on LinkedIn. So Dignity Inc. is kind of the place to go and follow. But other than that, I leave it to the experts.
All right. Well, we'll make sure and tag as many of those as we can find so people can find them.
Please do.
Okay, so let's wrap up with a couple fun questions, and then the same question we always ask the guests. So this one's a little unique to you, and don't give me this cliche, all of them.
Okay.
So your whole thing is emotions, Marcel. Mm-hmm. What are your favorite emotions?
It's the one that once I learned what it was, it described me. There's an emotion called ebullience. Ebullient, when you're ebullient, it's beyond joy. Now think about that. Everyone would nod their head. That's a great one. Not all the time. Because when you're young and you're ebullient, people misread it as, hey, why don't you dial that back a little bit, young man? I'm uncomfortable around all that energy. And so then you whittle yourself down a little bit and you say, I'm bad because I'm full of energy. And then you get into college and you bartend at a restaurant called Bennigan's, and people love you there. This is amazing. It matches. But then you get around other humans who aren't ebullient and they don't want to dial theirs up. They just point their finger at you and they make it dial it back. So I grew up in a world where humans that I trusted and loved saw and judged ebullience as not helpful, not always good. When you go to Catholic school and you are ebullient, it doesn't always allow you to do your best work. So that's one that I love. But once I learned what it was, it helped me better navigate. Oh my gosh, that's when I saw that emotion and I saw the story, the impulse and the purpose, just like what I felt when I saw dignity, when I learned about dignity. You can track all the bad things I did to myself in my life to one emotion, unworthy. It's not an emotion, it's just a feeling, right? Unworthy. It's the opposite of dignity. So when I saw dignity and when I saw ebullience, those two changed my life.
Do you think that they need to add that emotion to the emotional Pixar film that they have?
I think that would be wonderful. I think they ought to include the emotion of equanimity, which means Troy's able to see things from both sides without judgment. I think they ought to add the emotion of dispassion. Dispassion means I can take a very matter-of-fact look and not really have a lot of emotion, but more to be added to Pixar movies, that's for sure.
All right. So what's your favorite thing, because you're passionate about it, obviously, about policing in general, whether it's police officers or firefighters or all of them combined? What's your favorite thing about them?
They teach me every day. They teach me every single day. They teach me the whole idea of what it's like to serve and what it means to sacrifice. They teach me what it's like to lead and what it's like to manage. They teach me what it's like to navigate entitlement, and they teach me what it's like to lead with dignity. They teach me what it's like to have this idea of stubbornness. Yeah, I'm not going to change my belief, but then they also just awe me with their inspiration of learning different ways to try different technologies like drones out of the back of their vehicles. They're my best teachers. They're my best teachers.
And then we've delved pretty far into what you do specifically and haven't talked too much high level about entrepreneurship. But the last question is always the same that we ask guests, and that's if it's somebody that's either getting into entrepreneurship, somebody that's currently in entrepreneurship, and maybe it's the current dealing with emotions, things like that, what is the best advice that you could give an entrepreneur?
Every single time an entrepreneur sits down and looks at the year, maybe they think about the relationships that they want to go and grow. What relationships do I want to initiate? What relationships do I want to radiate? What relationships do I want to insulate? They have all these great goals and objectives and strategies and resources and tactics, and boy, their whole SWOT analysis of 2026 is pristine. My biggest recommendation is what emotions are needed to make all of that happen. Every single time you give me a goal, the goal is inside of a police department, raise your hand if you're not doing well. Every single officer I've ever met knows they should be able to raise their hand if they're not doing well. And yet you walk up and you're like, "You going to raise your hand?" They're like, "No way, man. Ain't raising my hand." So not only do I have to have the goal and objective, I've got to have the emotion needed and necessary to do what? Put it into action. So when Simon Sinek says, "Find your why," I'm like, let's go, Simon. Find your why, but you're also going to have to find your backbone. You're going to have to find that emotion that puts it into action. That's my biggest takeaway.
That's great. It's been a lot of fun, Marcel. It's been wonderful. Really appreciate you coming on.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.